Okay, this week on BSD Now, we've got some great news for OpenBSD, as well as the scoop on the newly released FreeBSD 10.0. Yes, it's finally here. We're going to be talking to Colin Percival about running FreeBSD 10 on Amazon EC2, and lots of other interesting stuff he's done for the project over the years. After that, we'll be showing you how to do some bandwidth monitoring and network performance testing in a combo tutorial. And of course, we got your round of questions and all the latest news. So stay tuned here right now to BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 21, recorded January 22nd, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Hey, we're glad to have you guys with us today. Got another cool episode, lots of neat stuff to talk about. We're going to be interviewing Colin Percival here in a little bit, a FreeBSD security officer, and done a whole bunch of stuff. So we got a lot of good questions for him. But before we get to that, we're going to go through this week's headlines. So what's the big headline that we're going to open up with here, Alan?
Obviously, it's FreeBSD 10 was finally released after
Yay.
much work and many delays.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of huge changes going on here, so it was important to make sure everything was done right. Some of the biggest things are package NG is now the default. All the old package tools are gone. So happy fun times there. Binary packages that are actually updated on a regular basis. It's going to make life so much better for everyone. Plus the support for extra repos and stuff, because I run my own repo for my servers because we have lots of crazy things going on.
But customized flags.
Some other stuff. GCC is no longer the default. We have Clang for most
not
architectures.
Just the default, it's not even in the base anymore.
Although I don't think Clang works on ARM. I forget how they do that specifically. But anyway. Also, Unbound has been imported into the base system along with LDNS, and that replaces Bind. So that will eliminate something like between a third and half of all security advisories that have ever come out for FreeBSD have been about Bind.
Goodness.
So not having that in the base system means that you can do it with ports and Colin says that GCC is still around for some architectures like ARM where there isn't Clang.
Oh, okay. So it's on ARM. Okay.
Also,
in addition, Hyper-V support got put in this release. We got the AMD KMS drivers for people running desktops.
Beehive is available now. Working pretty well. There's even more stuff in 10 stable now, but that's coming. Vert.io, which was required for Beehive, although some of Vert.io was already in 9.2, but I think they added the SCSI one maybe in 10. A couple other things. Make was replaced with bmake, which is imported from NetBSD. So that improves some stuff. We mentioned the package stuff, the virtualization stuff, trim for SSDs, for ZFS and other fun stuff like that.
We got ZFS on root in the installer now.
That was me. I keep forgetting that one, and I'm the one that did it.
That little one.
It's very cool. What else? We had the more SMP patches for PF to make that even better. NetMap support, wireless improvements, and the new iSCSI stack.
Of course, it's used in the base system too.
Yes, no longer depending on that shaky userland library. You can now do it in the kernel, and it seems to work very well.
There's just a lot of stuff that got changed. I mean, even smaller stuff. We make the notes here, like replacing patch with a BSD license version. And
a lot of almost every GPL tool got replaced with a BSD version where possible.
Yeah, this is great though. This is a long time coming. I mean, I remember when they said it'll be out. What was it? September was the original target.
The original one was around Thanksgiving, so November or something.
Okay,
and
November.
Then it got pushed to the end of the year, and then it got pushed again, and then there was an ABI break and all that fun stuff.
Oh yeah,
a couple other cool things on AMD 64. The max amount of memory went from 1 terabyte to 4, since it's not that hard to get a computer that can take that much RAM now. It made a bunch of other changes.
Let's see, they built that one machine that had a terabyte, so I wonder what the next one will be. That bumps beyond that. That's cool.
Exactly.
And like you said, the best news, we finally got rid of GCC and bind, and hopefully, as somebody wrote in the notes here, SendMail is next. Was that you or TJ who wrote that out?
No, that was TJ.
Okay. Well, hopefully SendMail's next. We'll see. Cool. So yes, it's officially out now. So you can start up your FreeBSD update system or do your source-based upgrade if you're into that thing, and you'll be ready to roll on 10.0. And we wish you happy computing on it. Again, long time coming, but I am so relieved that it's out.
Yep.
Finally made it. Cool. Okay. Well, next up, we have some OpenSSH news. OpenSSH 6.5 just issued a call for testing. So it looks like our buddy Damian Miller announced a call for testing just this last week. This is a huge, huge release focused on new features rather than bug fixes, but it includes some bug fixes as well. So we got new ciphers that need to be played with, new key formats, new config options, and we have the links in the show notes to the mailing list, which has all the gory details to see what's changed. And I guess they're looking at putting it into OpenBSD 5.5 in May. So I look forward to it, but please help test it ahead of time so they can make sure it's solid and really ready to roll by the time May gets here.
Yeah,
and of course,
some of the important ones were, like you mentioned, the new private key format means that your private key will be encrypted using bcrypt key derivation function rather than, I think the old one was MD5 or SHA or something.
Sure.
So it says this format is used unconditionally for the ED25519 keys, but may also be requested when generating or saving existing keys using the -O flag in SSH keygen. And they said they intend to make the new format the default in the near future, but they don't want to change the default in the first new release in case there's a problem.
Sure. Well, definitely go ahead, hit up the link, see if it's something you're interested in testing. Maybe there's a feature there you've been waiting for. And again, let them know if it works or doesn't work so they have some feedback to go on when they're getting ready to go to the release. So next up, we have a FreeNAS 9.21 beta, I guess, was just released. Or actually, excuse me, this was a do-it-yourself NAS story. But I got to read a little farther in the notes here. So it's another new blog post about FreeNAS. So what's the quote on this, Alan? What's it about?
So this guy... he said he briefly considered doing NAS for free or an eco NAS blog, but he saw that, give FreeNAS a try first and found that it works quite a bit better. And it says, TJ's notes here, really long article with lots of details about his setup and why you might want to use a NAS and some of the things you've done. But basically, he says back in 2012, he built his own NAS machine and talked about it. Turned out to be pretty popular. Last year, he wrote 2 similar NAS articles about building a 12 terabyte NAS and a very basic economy NAS for people on a limited budget. But then he went on and in this expanded one and talks about why he picked FreeNAS and goes through all the different hardware he picked out and why, to kind of give you an idea of, where it's safe to cut corners and where it's better not to, and comparing the different types of drives. Like here he's got the Western Digital green versus red, and the price difference is about $20 on a 4 terabyte drive. And I would definitely say go with the red rather than.
Yeah. Well, cool. I guess the pull quote is here that he did briefly consider suggesting NAS for free for the EconoNAS blog, since it's essentially a fork of the FreeNAS tree and may run better on slower hardware, but ultimately he couldn't recommend anything other than FreeNAS. So that's pretty cool. There's enough features and nice, cool new stuff happening there that pull people to stick with the real thing. So that's cool.
Just a quick back reference. Colin says that the old SSH key format used MD5, not MD5 crypt. And so the new one using bcrypt is about 500 million times more secure against brute force of your the passphrase on your SSH key.
Only 500 million times?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's probably just a rough estimate.
Yeah. I want the specifics. Cool.
Well, if you want the specific, Colin would be the person to ask.
Yeah, he will probably answer it in our next segment. So
yeah, he's
good deal.
Crazy.
Okay, next
guy.
up. Yep, Colin's awesome.
Yep.
So next article, we have OpenBSD. We mentioned this, I think it was last week, where they were needing some funding for their electricity to run their build farm, all the servers that are in Theo's basement. Yep. And we just mentioned it briefly at the end of last week's show, but I guess it kind of blew up all over the internet since then. They made headlines in a lot of major tech news sites, Slashdot, ZDNet, The Register, Hacker News, Reddit, Twitter, and of course thousands of comments. I'm sure people arguing, what does this mean? Well, anyway, the bottom line is they needed $20,000 to cover the electric costs for the server rack that hosts all these systems. They got a ton of positive reaction from the community helping out so far. And it appears not only have they reached their goal, but they got $100,000 in donations.
Yeah, apparently it's 111,000 so far. It's been
dang.
So their goal for the year now is 150,000. And they said if $10 were donated by each person that downloaded OpenBSD from the main site, not counting the mirrors, in the last year, then they would reach that goal. Or if $2 were given for every download of just OpenSSH source code in the last year from the master site, not counting the mirrors, then they would have their $150,000. Or if a penny was donated for every PF or SSH install within a mainstream operating system or phone sold in the last year, then they would have reached their goal.
That is pretty cool. But still, that's good to see that the community rallied behind that and was able to make that happen. So I guess that server rack will stay lit.
Yep. So far in 2014, they've received 1,704 donations, large and small. And that's quite an improvement because in 2013, their fundraising was like 30,000, I think.
Well, that's a huge jump. Well, that's what happened. You put the word out. I mean, the BSD communities have always rallied around and been able to make this stuff happen. So I guess we got a quote here from Bob Beck. He said, "We've gone in 1 week from being in a dire situation to having a commitment of approximately $100,000 in donations to the foundation."
Yep.
Just 1 week.
Yeah, so here's the number. So during 2012, the foundation received $19,800 in donations and paid out $40,000. In 2013, they raised $63,000 and spent $54,000. So they're definitely doing better this year than last year.
Definitely. Well, that is cool. I mean, this is pretty much the shining example of how the BSD community can come together and make something like this happen.
Exactly.
I think even the Linux folks realize how critical BSD is in the world at large. I mean, look at all the tech that's come out of OpenBSD that's used.
Yeah, like OpenSSH.
Yeah, and how many systems out there running bits of OpenBSD code and don't even know it. But that is really cool. Anyway, cool. Well, awesome. I'm so glad to hear you guys got that large donations in and made, far surpassed your goal. So wish you luck with the rest of the year's fundraising as well. So next up, we want to mention our sponsor for this week's show, which of course is IX Systems, who not only do they specialize in BSD on the server and can build you a great system that'll be custom tailored to all your needs, they also launched their new FreeNAS mini box on Amazon a few weeks back, which we mentioned last week as well. We'll try and keep that link in the show notes for you guys today, so if you want to take a look at that. Looks like a pretty cool system.
Yeah, and it's
what can they do for you?
And
small, quiet, and they can customize it in a couple different ways for you depending on your storage needs.
And I think you can buy it with or without hard drives. If you already have the drives and you want to just load it up, then you can buy the one without the drives. Or
Very cool. Well, if you go to the website, ixsystems.com/BSD Now, you can take a look at some of the information about IX Systems. There's a form you can fill out where you'll be able to download a free guide to buying open source servers, which would be really helpful if you're looking at possibly purchasing a new server here in the near future. Anything else you want to tell us about IX Systems, Alan?
Just, like we talked about before, they have the battle-tested QA system. So when you buy something from them, it gets tested for 3 solid days of brutal testing first, so that when you get the hardware, you can be sure that it's going to work. A lot of times, if you just bought the parts yourself or something and try to put it together, there's always that chance that one part is going to fail, and then you're gonna have to wait for it to be sent away and come back, and so on. And I guess the other big thing is just, if you're trying to do it yourself, you always have this nagging doubt in the back of your mind whether is that going to work how I need it to work. And it's like, well, this device and this device is supported, but is that one? It's not very clear. And
is it the optimal configuration for the throughput I want or something?
And IX takes care of all of the headache, and you just get hardware that works.
Well, very cool.
And,
definitely check out.
They have great support. I've dealt with, I had a bunch of questions when I first got my giant server. I'm like, how do I set up the multipath? It's like, I've never done that before.
They walked you all through it, huh? Very cool. Well, excellent. We'll check the links in the show notes afterwards. Again, ixsystems.com/BSD Now for more information on them. So next up, we'll be back in just a moment with our interview with Colin Percival. So welcome, Colin. Glad to have you with us.
Good to be here.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Well, first up, we always ask you to give us a little bit about yourself. How did you first get involved into BSD?
So back in, I think it was 2000, might have been 1999, my parents got a cable modem, and this was the great new technology of permanent high-speed internet access. We had until that point just been using dial-up. But the problem was we were going to have one cable modem, and we had 4 computers in the house. We did have everything networked, so we could send files to each other and use the one printer we had. But we all wanted to use the same internet connection. So we needed to find some way of sharing this. At that point, Windows, which is what most of us were using, didn't have any support for internet connection sharing yet. So my brother went out and talked to some people and discovered that OpenBSD was the way to go. So he got some old hardware, one of our computers that we had since upgraded, installed OpenBSD on it, got it running, and it worked fine for about 3 months, and then the 200 megabyte hard drive that was in there failed. So at that point, I can't remember exactly why, but he wasn't available to fix it. So I had to go in and fix it. And I tried the OpenBSD installer, and I just couldn't figure out how to install OpenBSD. So I went online, and I heard about this thing called FreeBSD that was supposed to be a lot easier to install. So I downloaded FreeBSD, and indeed, sysinstall was a lot easier to use. So I may be the only person who is using FreeBSD now because I liked sysinstall.
Yeah.
What version would that have been back in the day?
I think it must have been 3.5 or thereabouts.
Okay, yeah, a while back.
I remember 4.0 coming out soon after that.
Oh, very cool.
So how did you become a committer?
So I soon after this, in 2001, I went off to university planning on doing my doctorate on parallel computing. When I was an undergrad, I did this crazy project of calculating the quadrillionth bit of pi. This was using an algorithm that was invented at my university, where I did my undergrad. And it involved having computers around the internet, each computing part of a series. And then they would send the results in to me, and then I would add up all their partial sums. Very much a MapReduce thing before Google existed. So I had this idea I was going to take this approach and extend it to work on more interesting computing problems. But because I was going to be getting people around the world to run my code, I really cared about security. I didn't want to have them trust me with their computing power and then have someone break into the system. So I was using FreeBSD because that was what I was familiar with at that point, but I was very concerned about security. And I kept on seeing these security advisories coming out. And the process back then was you had to download the patch and patch your source code, then recompile everything. And this was a process that, as a very new FreeBSD user, I wasn't really very comfortable with. So I figured, well, I know how to write code. I'm a much better developer than I am a system administrator. So let's see if I can deal with my inadequacies in system administration by writing code to help myself. And so I wrote FreeBSD update. I went onto the mailing lists and asked people, so why don't we have binary updates? And the answer always came back, well, this is a really difficult thing to do. Being young and foolish, I said, well, it can't be that difficult.
How hard can that be?
I went ahead and did it when everybody else said, no, there's no point even trying. So this was in early 2003 or so. Then I went to BSDCon 2003 and presented a paper there about my update system. Talked to a lot of FreeBSD developers there. It was the first time I had met any FreeBSD developers. And then a few months after that, Robert Watson asked me if I wanted to become a FreeBSD committer. So I got my commit bit in January 2004, I guess almost exactly 10 years ago today, and joined the FreeBSD security team soon after.
So cool. How did you end up becoming the security officer?
Mostly because I was there. I was on the security team. I was a grad student, so I was always trying to avoid doing my actual research, so I had plenty of time to work on FreeBSD. So I was writing a lot of the advisories, testing patches, and so on. And then when Jacques wanted to step down because he was going off to join a fruit company in California, Des was busy with some other things. I can't remember why he wasn't. Des was the deputy security officer. I can't remember why it was that he didn't want to take over as security officer at that point. So I was sort of the next natural choice.
Well, you mentioned already one of them, but you've had a hand in creating a number of great utilities in the base system, such as FreeBSD Update, PortSnap. So what are you doing currently?
What I'm doing currently, I'm not as active in FreeBSD as I would like to be. I'm no longer security officer. I handed that off 2 years ago to Simon, and then last year he handed it off to Des now. So I'm no longer security officer, but I am still on the security team. And as part of that, although I'm not very active with writing advisories, I can provide the voice of experience, stepping in to say, well, this is why we have done things this particular way. Last time when we had a situation like this, we tried doing it that other way, and really bad things happened. So we've decided we're going to do it this way now. And then also, because I created FreeBSD Update and PortSnap, I'm still involved in running those, making sure everything goes smoothly there. Just this morning, I was getting emails telling me that PortSnap mirrors were syncing slowly. It turns out that's because someone decided to do a commit that touched 20,000 ports. Yeah. And so everything's being updated now. Actually load on the mirrors, obviously. So on the security side, I'm basically just in a maintenance role of keeping those things running, and then stepping in with the advice of wisdom of the ages, so to speak. Beyond that, my main role in terms of development is with getting FreeBSD onto Amazon EC2, which is something I've been working on for about 6 years now.
Yeah, so I guess you want to tell us a little bit about the story behind FreeBSD getting on to EC2?
So back in 2006, I decided I was going to start doing my own company providing online data backup. This came largely out of my role as security officer, in fact, because I was getting really worried by the information I had on my laptop. At one point, we had several security advisories for FreeBSD that hadn't gone out yet, but then also there was a remote root bug in Bind, I think it was, and then there was also a vulnerability in OpenSSL. And these big advisories like OpenSSL and Bind, they have to be coordinated between all these different vendors, because we all ship the same code, and you don't want to have a situation where one person announces it early and other people aren't ready with the patches.
Right.
So there's a lot of coordination, and you really don't want to accidentally let these things slip first, because then people won't tell you about them the next time around. So I was really worried that I had all this sensitive information on my laptop, but I wanted to have backups because I didn't want to lose all my data. And I also wanted backups to be convenient so that I would actually do them, because I know from past experience, if I had to actually plug in an external drive to do backups, it really wasn't going to happen very regularly.
Right.
So the convenient way of doing backups was online, but I was worried that if it wasn't secure, then people would get access to the backups and then hear about all these unreleased advisories, and it would really not be a good thing. So I decided, well, I do cryptography, I do security, I can build my own backup service. So that's how Tarsnap was born. But then I didn't want to actually be managing servers myself. So I decided I looked at what Amazon was doing, which they had launched their S3 storage service, simple storage service, compacted down to S3, just about a year prior to that, I think. And then in 2006, they launched their EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. And these two exactly fit what I needed for parsnap, in that I need to have a storage service I could put people's data on, but then also a place I can have my code running. Unfortunately, EC2 was only available with a particular flavor of Linux, so I started saying to them, look, I want to use this, but I want to use FreeBSD. Can we get FreeBSD into EC2?
Were there any specific challenges getting FreeBSD working? Was it political, technical, or otherwise?
The biggest problem was that in the beginning, Amazon EC2 only ran, so it all runs on Xen, but they only ran with PV, so power virtualization mode. This was the original way that Xen worked. It's really the only way to do things on the really old CPUs, or at the time they were the standard CPUs, which don't have hardware virtualization support.
Right.
So it was entirely reasonable that Amazon launched with only support for Xen PV mode. Unfortunately, FreeBSD's PV Xen code, let's just say it didn't get very much testing, and it was clear if you tried to use it that it had not received much testing.
Sure.
So we had code, sort of. There were also some other minor hurdles along the way, like Amazon was running an older version of Xen which wasn't compatible with the way that we set up our paging tables. If we had a really active maintainer for the Xen code, he could probably have worked around this in a couple of weeks, but we had code that was thrown into the tree and then more or less abandoned there.
Right.
And then pretty much every release, someone would update other parts of the system, virtual memory code, i386 code, and it would just accidentally break the Xen code, and nobody would notice until someone, usually me, would try to launch, or try to build a FreeBSD image and find this doesn't work. So yeah, the PV thing is really the big hurdle, and that is still an issue with FreeBSD if you want to use the really old EC2 instance types. So when Amazon first launched EC2, they had one type of virtual machine. It had half of a CPU, it had 1.7 gigs of RAM, it had 160 gigs of hard disk space. This has since retroactively been named the M1 small instance size. And if you want to run on that now, you still can't do it with FreeBSD claiming to be Unix. So I mentioned they were running PV. A couple of years after that, in 2008, I think it was, they realized people really want to run Windows. Windows doesn't support PV, but it does support or in fact everything will run on the new virtualization mode called HVM, which is hardware virtualization. And this is the mode that uses the new functionality of modern CPUs that all recent CPUs can do hardware virtual paging table support. Intel and AMD have different names for it, but it's the same basic functionality there. So they had to add Windows. They had to add HVM support in order to get Windows support. And this, in fact, was exactly what FreeBSD needed in order to avoid using the PV code that really wasn't very functional in FreeBSD. So on the old instance types, the way to get FreeBSD running is basically you tell EC2, this is actually Windows. Of course, EC2 doesn't look inside your image to see what is running. It just sets things up in a particular way, and if your image has this Windows flag on it, then it will set things up with HVM as if it was running Windows. On all of the newer instance types, which I think is everything Amazon has launched in the past 3 or 4 years, it runs, there is support for Unix instances running HVM. And so on all of the new instance types, FreeBSD just runs as Unix.
Right. I guess the difference there is that when you tell it it's Windows, you're actually paying more cents per hour for a Windows license, right?
Exactly, because that was I assume the deal they negotiated with Microsoft was some sort of a cents per hour to going to Microsoft, and they would count up how many instances we were running and send the right bill to Microsoft, and if it calls itself Windows, then they would have to pay for it, presumably.
Must be Windows then, yeah.
So, cool. So that means that if you're using any of the modern instance types, you don't have to pay for the Windows license anymore? That's
correct, as long as you use the right FreeBSD image.
Right.
So I publish I publish an image that runs for the M3, the C3, the I2, and the HPC instance types. It's labeled as that on my site. And if you run that, then you will not be paying the Windows tax, and you will not be able to run on the older instance types. There's a separate image which is labeled as being for M1, M2, C1, and T1 instance types. In fact, that will run on every type of instance, but you don't want to use it on the modern instance sites because it does have the Windows tax attached to it.
Cool. Is there anything special 10.0 release users should know about running it on EC2? For example, like generic working?
So FreeBSD, I mentioned everything runs under HVM. Everything will boot under HVM, but there are particular drivers needed for running under Xen. There's a driver for using the Xen network, a driver for using the Xen disks. And in previous versions of FreeBSD, you needed to have the options Xen HVM and the Xen HVM drivers added to your kernel. This was in the Xen HVM kernel configuration. In FreeBSD 10, this is part of the generic kernel. So whereas previous versions of FreeBSD on EC2, you had to run the Xen HVM kernel, which meant it wasn't supported with FreeBSD Update, because FreeBSD Update only does generic kernels. Now with 10.0, it's in there. Everything that's in my EC2 image is just bits straight off of the ISO. So you can update it using FreeBSD Update, getting security patches and so on, just as if you were running on real hardware. So that's the FreeBSD kernel side of things. On the usability side of things, I've been doing a lot of work to make FreeBSD EC2 more easy for people to use. And most recently, I added support for a system called EC2 user data. So this is something that people have been using on the Linux side of things for a long time. When you launch an EC2 instance, you can provide some data which is then passed through to the image that sort of tells it how to set itself up. And now with EC2, running my latest FreeBSD images, you can do the same thing. I don't use the cloud init system that Ubuntu created, but I have my own system config in it. And again, it's the same sort of idea, except that FreeBSD is more built around the idea of editing configuration files rather than running code to turn things on and off the way that Linux does things. So with my system, you can very easily just say, add these lines to etc/rcconf. And then, because in FreeBSD, most things are configured that way, it's very easy, rather than needing to write a shell script or a Python script the way you would for using Cloud Init.
Cool. And then I guess you also made, was it First Boot or something like that?
Yeah, so this is something that I added to the FreeBSD-based system in order to support this new functionality. So in EC2, there's things that you need to do the first time that a system launches. So obviously these EC2 images, they're distributed without any sort of mechanism for locking in, because if there was a password or a key, an SSH public key, then I would be able to lock into everybody's instances. You don't want that. You shouldn't want that. So the way EC2 works, when you create an EC2 instance, you tell EC2, I want to use this public key to log into it. And then when the instance launches, it needs to download from EC2 the SSH public key and set things up so that you can use that to log in. Obviously, this only needs to be done the first time the image boots. You might not even want it to be done later times. If you have a user that you use for logging in and setting up the system, then you delete that user later. If you reboot, you don't want it to be recreated again.
Right.
So there's a need for a way to have code that runs the first time an image boots and doesn't run later times. I had this just as part of my EC2 scripts for a long time, but then I realized this really could be useful for other purposes. So in sometime around 10.0 beta 1, I got that into the FreeBSD based system. And now it's also used for running FreeBSD update the first time that an image boots. If you have the first boot FreeBSD update port installed, which I do on my EC2 images, it can be used for installing packages the first time a system boots. Again, if you have the first boot packages port installed, which I do on my EC2 images. And it's also used for running the download configuration data from EC2 script, which sets up the the rcconf file so that later RCD scripts can use it, which means that now, even though packages are installed when the system first boots, you can provide through the EC2 user data the set of packages you want to have installed. That will be put into your rcconf file early enough that the FreeBSD first boot packages script will look at that and see the list that you provided when it goes to install packages for you.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that can be really useful. And it's not exclusive to EC2 anymore, right? You could use that with any virtualization type setup.
Absolutely. I mean, I wrote this code I wrote this code for EC2 because that's what I do, and a lot of it is in my EC2 script support. But it would certainly be easy to take that and turn it into a Google, what do they call it?
Compute engine?
Yeah, right, Google Compute Engine scripts. If someone wants to do that, I don't use Google Compute Engine, so I'm not the person to do that. But
right.
Do you have a place with...
My code could be easily repurposed, and in fact, I know NetBSD is using some of my EC2 scripts for their images.
Cool.
Do you have a wiki page or some place with more information on getting started on that if somebody's interested in taking a look?
I have a page on my website, demonology.net/FreeBSD on EC2, but if you just type FreeBSD EC2 into Google, you'll find it.
Yep.
It'll be right up at the top of the results.
Yeah, and his blog's got lots of useful information, including explaining how config init works and all that stuff.
Okay.
Is there anything else in 10 release that you were particularly excited about?
Well, I'm really excited about the new packaging system, both from the perspective of it being a lot smoother to use than the old system, but also for security. One of the big problems from my perspective about the old packaging system was that we didn't have any sort of signing on it. You would download a package over FTP and you just sort of hope that you got the right bits. If someone was intercepting your TCP connection, they could have fed you some rootkit, and you just go ahead and install it and not realize that you're installing this Trojan code.
Yep.
With package NG, I guess it's a package now. It's
now
that it's in the system, it's not the next generation. There's a mechanism for signing repositories, which is now in use. So if you run package install whatever on FreeBSD 10, you know that you're actually getting the bits that were built by the FreeBSD package building cluster.
Yeah, and also the libfetch and stuff has support for actually checking the SSL certificate now, which means you could also deliver it over SSL or HTTPS.
Right. I'm not so concerned about that in that I believe far more in end-to-end security.
Right.
So get the package and make sure that the package hashes to the right value. Because SSL has this, I mean, it will secure a connection, but it won't help you if someone
modified the package
into that mirror.
Right. Yeah. And, well, I guess the other big, real security boon with package is that it can do upgrades, and that the packages are rebuilt on a regular basis rather than once per release.
Right. I mean, from just based on the lack of package signing before now, I never used packages. I was always building from source using something like Portmaster. So for me, I've always had support for updating from one version of a package to the next. It's just been
slow
by building from source.
Yeah,
sure.
But yes, having new packages available quickly will make a big difference in terms of getting people, hopefully, to upgrade to new packages after there's security problems with old ones.
Yeah, and it's got support for the auditing thing, so you can actually fairly simply get a list of what package you have installed that might be vulnerable to various known issues.
Exactly, and this was already in the ports tree as port audit,
right.
But having it integrated into package makes it a lot simpler to access this, and it means that everybody has it rather than in the old prior to this, only the people who knew to install that port would get the functionality.
Exactly. So also, I guess the other thing you did was panic mail. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So this is something that I, in fact, first wrote for EC2 when I was first getting EC2 running, back when it was using this really broken FreeBSD PV code. I wanted to be able to get reports of kernel panics so that if there were bugs, which I knew there were, it would help me in tracking them down. Sometimes panics are very easy to trigger, but a lot of these, particularly dealing with virtual memory code, which is the big issue with XenPV, you're dealing with race conditions. You really just need to keep on hammering a system until eventually it falls over. So I wanted to make sure that when panics happened, I would actually hear about them. So I wrote this very simple script that I included in my EC2 images for a long time, which would, if the system reboots after a panic, I just take some basic information about the panic and email it to me. And then this way I could see the panic message and the backtrace. So if there's sometimes the panic messages are really, really obvious to tell you what went wrong, but often it's just page fault. So then you need to look at the backtrace and figure out why there was a page fault, and usually there's a null pointer that's being passed into a function and being dereferenced later. So this is something I wrote a long time ago, but I recently cleaned it up and added encryption to it, and then stuck it into the ports tree as a separate port. And this is something a lot of operating systems do. People using Windows, I'm sure, will have seen a problem has occurred. We would like to report this to Microsoft. Message box pop up.
And recently we learned that sends the data back over regular HTTP, so anyone sniffing your traffic can know exactly what's wrong with your machine.
Whoops.
Yes, and that's not really ideal. So with panic mail, as I said, I put some encryption into it. So with the panic mail port, there is a public key included, and I am the only person who has the private key matching that. So panic mail will be encrypted using this. It's 2048-bit RSA. Then ASCII armored and so on, so it will get through email easily. Then it will be emailed out, and when it reaches me, I can then decrypt it and see what the panic was. Of course, Windows and other systems, when they pop up this box, they usually say, Windows would like to submit the following information to Microsoft. And obviously there's situations where you might be doing something sensitive on your computer that you don't want to have released even just to me. And so the panic mail system, the default behavior is it will send an email to root. And I hope everybody is actually checking email that goes to root or forwarding it so that they can read it. And then that message will have the contents of the panic, all the information that will be submitted in plain text so that you can read it.
Sure.
Followed by the encrypted version. And it says, if you're okay with having it submitted, then delete everything down to where it says panic starts here. so that the plain text is all gone and you only send in the encrypted part.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to preview it.
Yeah.
I know FreeBSD's had the reputation for never crashing out there in the community, so I guess having this in the system, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, people who run large clusters know that occasionally you do see a kernel panic, and people who run stress tests know that there's some ways that you can cause more kernel panics to happen.
Sure.
This is why we have a stress test kit. If it never put any panics, then there wouldn't be any point having it.
Are you seeing more of a certain type of crash versus others? Have you started getting results from this?
I've gotten, I think, 30 panics reported so far, and it's been about 3 months. What it comes down to is people don't have this port installed yet. So anybody watching this, please go into the FreeBSD ports tree, sysutils/panicmail, and install it. This is a really useful thing to have to get reports to developers saying, hey, ever since you put this commit into the tree, there's been more panics. But that only happens if there's enough data coming in that you can actually see there's more panics now.
Sure.
Right. I went to a talk at university from one of the senior Windows developers who said that when they put this system into Windows, every week they would have emails going around saying, this week's top panic is driver X. And this allowed them very quickly to narrow down on the particular drivers, and it was usually drivers from third parties that didn't have as experienced developers, and find the code that was causing problems and make sure it got fixed. And Windows now is a lot more stable than it used to be, and I'm sure part of it is that they figured out how to track down what was making it unstable.
So you've mentioned it a few times already, but could you tell us a little bit more what Tarsnap is and how that came about? Well, I guess you already told us how it came about, but what it is?
I told you how it came about. So Tarsnap is online backups for the truly paranoid. At EuroBSDCon, I was giving a talk about this, and I thought, well, maybe for the truly paranoid isn't necessarily accurate anymore. Maybe now it's just online backups for people who have heard of Edward Snowden.
Yep.
Obviously, the NSA is trying to gather data, and if you care about the security of your data and you're putting it online, you really want to have it encrypted securely. As I said, I have a background in cryptography and security, so I figured I know how to do these things. I know how to build a secure system. So Tarsnap is a service. You download the source code. It's in the FreeBSD ports tree. sysutils/tarsnap, and then you create an account with me, with the Tarsnap service rather, and then it works on a prepaid model, sort of like cell phones. You deposit money into your account, and then you can use the service, and as you use the service, it eats up your money, and then you'll get an email at some point saying, hey, your account balance is low, please add more money. From a user perspective, Tarsnap is basically tar. The command line is exactly the tar command line with a few extra options for dealing with the cryptography, so saying which keys you want to use to encrypt things. In fact, Tarsnap is based on the BSD tar code, which has been in the FreeBSD ports tree since in the FreeBSD based system rather since 2004, I think. I was very lucky to be a FreeBSD developer when I started working on this because Tim was putting the code into FreeBSD so that FreeBSD would have a better tar system and a better way of handling archives. And I just happened to be in the right place to see him working on this and say, hey, this is exactly what I need, because I don't want to be writing code for creating tar balls and parsing them. I do cryptography, I don't do archives.
So where did the names Tarsnap and PortSnap originate, since we noticed a similarity there?
Yeah, so PortSnap came first, and the idea there was that it was signed snapshots of the ports tree. So everybody had been using CVSUP at that point. PortSnap would, on the server side of PortSnap, it would check out the entire ports tree and then create an archive out of that, essentially. Actually, a whole bunch of archives split up. But it would create a snapshot of ports tree, and then you would run portsnap. You would download that snapshot, and then you run portsnap later, and it updates to the next snapshot that portsnap has created. When it came to making tarsnap, first, well, people knew me from portsnap, so I figured having a similar name wouldn't hurt. It would remind people of who I was. But more substantially than that, tarsnap works with a deduplication system. So instead of the idea of having full backups plus incremental backups, the way that most backup systems still work, tarsnap is a snapshotted system. So every backup you create, every archive you create, is a full archive. It contains all of the data that you tell it to contain. Behind the scenes, tarsnap figures out, this block is actually the same as that block I stored earlier, so I'll just increment a reference count and not store the whole block all over again. Much like portsnap works, where when you update to a newer portsnap tree, it figures out, well, these ports haven't changed, so I'll leave their tarballs where they are, but these other ports have changed, so I'll update those bits, and only those bits.
Do people use tar, just out of curiosity, people use tarsnap just to back up like a private directory, or are they doing whole system backups with it? Or,
well, in a sense, I don't know what people are using it for, because everything is encrypted. Even the names of archives they create are encrypted. But of course, I do talk to my users, and so people tell me some people are using tarsnap to back up a very particular data. Some people are using tarsnap to do complete system backups. Complete system backups obviously have the advantage that it's easier to get a system up and running if you know exactly what was running on in every way on that system. I've heard horror stories from people who have done backups of, say, their databases, and then they've gone to install a new system, and it's got a different version of whatever database system they're using, and the new system doesn't understand the old databases. And so they have to go and try to find the old version of their database software. You don't want to be doing that if you're restoring after something dies. So there's times that you do want to have everything backed up, but there's times that you don't want to have everything backed up. You just want particular things. And in fact, a lot of tarsnap users will use tarsnap to back up their data, documents they've been writing, email they have, but they won't use it to back up their music or their videos, or their photos, because those multimedia files, they're a lot bigger, they will cost a lot more to store, and they figure, well, it's not really worth it.
Upload time too.
Their 50-second photo of their grandson, well, they can find another relative who has that photo, or they can just keep the other photos they have.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
I can't think of anything, except just continuing on that last point. Because tarsnap works with the tar model, it's very flexible on the command line. And one of the reasons I used tar as a starting point is that it allows people that flexibility. It allows people to script things. You can say, I want to create an archive containing exactly these files or directories. You can decide when you want to back up things. So it provides you all the flexibility that system administrators who use tar are used to having.
And it lets you utilize the competency you already have with using tar, right? Like you already know, I want to make a tar of everything, and I want to exclude this, that, and the other thing, and you already know how to do that. So it lessens the learning curve.
And in fact, if you have a script that uses tar, you can really just replace tar with tarsnap, and if you have a configuration file in place that says which keys you should be using, then your script will still work.
Well, that's cool. Well, I had one question to pick your brain with really quick here, since we're doing a lot of stuff with FreeBSD update on PCBSD. And I wasn't sure if you guys had any future plans on updating FreeBSD update further to take advantage of doing, say, rolling releases or, a stable branch that gets updated via binary. Is that something on the FreeBSD radar at all?
It's not something that I'm planning on doing right at this moment, mostly because I've been very busy with TarSnap and I haven't really had time to work on this.
Sure.
But one thing that GJB has been talking about is having FreeBSD update available for the snapshots that he builds, particularly snapshots of current, but also of stable, presumably.
Sure.
And theoretically, that could be done. It's mostly just a matter of finding the time to set things up.
Okay. Well, say we're using it in production on stable now, and I may have some patches heading your way here in the very near future to fix up a couple things.
I think what he's interested in doing is just allowing FreeBSD update upgrade to move you from one snapshot to the next.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay.
Not using FreeBSD update fetch to update from one along the stable branch.
Right.
So for people who aren't familiar with FreeBSD update, I wrote it originally as a system just for doing updates along security branches. But later on, I repurposed it to do upgrades between releases. And the stable branches are sort of partway between these two models. There's a lot more happening in them than there is in just a normal security branch.
Sure.
But you might want to get to points that aren't actual releases. So whether you consider a new snapshot to be an update or something new, it doesn't exactly fit into either model. But
right.
I think it's probably closer to being something new as far as FreeBSD update would be concerned.
Sure.
Right, because with the FreeBSD update fetch, does it normally have to deal with adding new files? I remember there was some weirdness that happened with when OpenSSL patch added a new file.
Yeah, it can add new files. What it doesn't know how to do is add new directories. So the problem there was that FreeBSD update fetch assumes that it's dealing with the entire FreeBSD world, except that if a file is not present, it won't be updated.
Sure.
What the problem came where someone didn't have user source installed, but FreeBSD update said there's a new source code file. And because it wasn't looking for an old source code file, it didn't realize that, in fact, there's no source tree at all.
Right.
Sure.
So
cool.
that's an odd glitch resulting from the fact that for a long time we just never had any new files being added or deleted in security branches.
A security branch.
It could be that big a problem.
Sure. Well, cool. Well, thank you.
Now that I think about it, there is one reason to use the upgrade model rather than the update model for going to new snapshots, which is that FreeBSD update fetch doesn't try to do any configuration file merging. It just says if you've because normally we don't change configuration files in security browsers. FreeBSD update upgrade does try to merge configuration files for you because, well, it needs to.
Right.
Well,
Actually,
that's some good advice. I may actually have to look at how we do our rolling release then. Maybe switch it to doing the upgrade method instead.
About that, when FreeBSD upgrade does the merge master, could there be either change the default or just add an extra flag to FreeBSD update upgrade to pass minus capital F to merge master, so it would skip the SVN ID in the files, so you don't have to confirm that you're okay with changing the SVN ID in every RC file that changed?
Well, so there's two answers to that. First, FreeBSD update doesn't use merge master. It uses a merging system I wrote for myself because I found merge master was too difficult to work with. Some people like merge master, but I'm not one of them. The other answer is that in the latest version of the FreeBSD update code, it does specifically pull out the FreeBSD ID tags, and if that's the only thing that's changed, then it won't argue, it will just update silently.
Oh, awesome. So in this, that's the version that went in 10?
It's in 10.
Okay.
And I think it's now in 9 stable as well.
Oh, well then problem solved. Awesome.
Yeah, I think we added an extra flag to our version too that has like non-interactive mode, so it won't even prompt you. It'll just take the defaults if it does run into something and then make a backup of it. But something worth looking into.
Yeah, and I consider doing something like that in FreeBSD update, but really I don't want to have it break people's systems silently.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to make sure that people knew what was being done to their systems.
Sure. Well, cool. Well, excellent. This was a great interview, Colin. Thank you so much for having the time to come on here with us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Always love to talk.
Today we're going to be combining 2 programs for monitoring bandwidth and benchmarking your network performance. Both these would be great to have on your router if you set up one from our previous tutorials. These tools are going to be called VNstat and iPerf. And they're both available natively for all the main BSDs in their various ports or package repositories. So you'd go ahead and install them as you normally would any other package, and then we'll go ahead and start using them, getting it set up.
Yep. So I just installed VNstat from FreeBSD's package repository. It gave me the latest version. And now if I run VNstat, it'll say unable to open database because it doesn't exist yet. So what we need to do is create the database. So what VNstat does is run in the background and collect stats on your network. And it allows you to keep track of how much bandwidth is being used. It can be especially important if, for example, on a router, if you have a cap on your internet connection. A couple of years ago, the cable connection I had was limited to 50 gigabytes of download per month. And so I had to keep track of how much I was using to make sure I didn't go over that and get charged extra.
Sure.
So to create a database, you use the -u flag and then specify the interface. In my case, EM0. Oops. So it's now created that new database. And you'll see it says unable to read the database, and then the new database has been created. And obviously on your system, you might have to replace EM0 with some other network device, right? If you look at your if config, you can see you have lots of different network devices depending on what's installed in your system. So anyway, if we now we need to create the vnstat config file. So if we go into user local etc, we can copy the vnstat sample to the main config and edit it. Set my interface to EM0, got my database location, anything else I might want to change. You can change all kinds of different stuff depending on, based on what the maximum bandwidth of your connection is. You might specify that so that, it gives you more useful statistics, right? If it's based on using a 100 megabit connection and you only have 10, then the graphs are not going to make as much sense.
Sure.
So anyway, then you can set up vnstat to run in the background. Normally you would do this, with your rc.conf type way to make it run as a daemon, but we'll just run it manually so that we can see what's going on. And as this collects data, you'll be able to run vnstat, and it will actually give us a summary here. And we see that the database was last updated a couple minutes ago, and we can see that I've moved 2 kilobytes across the network, just my SSH traffic. If you do vnstat long help, you can see there are lots of different options and different reports that you can get out of vnstat. There's also other tools that allow you to draw ASCII graphs or actual graphs. If you have a web server set up, you can monitor your usage and all that fun stuff. There's also the man vnstat, which will give you the man page. It has even more information. You can also do live monitoring to see what's actually happening in real time. You can also look at per client bandwidth usage based on the different interfaces, depending how you have your router set up or different networks. And if we look now, we can see that still not much going on.
Mm-hmm.
But if we look at the second tool we were talking about, which is iPerf, which is an internet performance application, basically allows you to measure the speed that you can send and receive across the network. So I've set up a second machine here, which is running iPerf in server mode. So it's sitting there listening on a port, waiting for incoming connections. And now if we go back to our tutorial machine, if we now run iPerf on here and point it at that server, so iPerf, and then the IP of my server, it will make a connection and start transferring some data.
Oh, cool.
I think the default runs for 10 seconds. You can also use the -t flag to change that default amount of time. And the default is TCP, but it can also use UDP, which can give you different information about your network as you do the test.
Sure.
It's not stopping at 10 seconds like it's supposed to. Anyway, if I interrupt it, we can see that in 36.7 seconds, we transferred 1.92 gigabytes, averaging about 450 megabits per second.
Mm-hmm.
So now if we look at, VNstat hasn't updated yet. I forget what the update interval is on that for it to, for you to see. Anyway, if we do, if there's other flags you can put on iPerf, if you put -T10, it'll only run for 10 seconds. And if you do -I1, it will print a report every 1 second. So instead of just getting a summary at the end, you'll be able to see what's happening in real time.
Mm-hmm.
So we can see for each second, we can see how much data is being transferred and what the speed is. And that's a little better. We see now we actually averaged 785 megabits per second and transferred just shy of a gigabyte in 10 seconds.
Oh, there you go.
It's quite a bit better. You'll see similar output on the server console. If I switch over to that, you'll see that you can see what it received. So the output looks almost identical. If you do different intervals or whatever, you can see more of a difference. If you use the -U switch, it'll use UDP. Because UDP doesn't have any flow control, it defaults, you have to specify a speed for it to try to send, and then you can see what it receives on the other side. If you don't specify one, it defaults to 1 megabit. So if you do -U, you also need -B and then a rate. So we'll say 100 megabits. So I'll restart the server with the UDP flag, and now we'll do the same command we just did with the client, but with the UDP and a attempt rate of 100 megabits a second. And we'll see that it sends 100 megabits a second. But if we look on the server side, we see some interesting stats. It's actually looking at the jitter, how much time difference there is between the packets.
That's helpful.
The lower that is, the more consistent the connection is. And then it shows you the loss rate. You can see how many total datagrams were sent and received, and we say, oh, a couple got lost here and there. A lot of that's because I'm doing virtualization, so the network's not always the greatest. But using these tests, say like transatlantically between servers in different countries, can really give you an idea of what that connection is capable of.
Sure.
And what the latency variance is. That's what jitter is. I know that normally it takes like 100 milliseconds to go between here and there, but if 1 in every 100 packets takes 120 milliseconds, then that could have adverse effects on things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's lots of other stuff you can do with iPerf. It's very useful after you change like sysctls. You can see how big of an effect that might have had on things. Like I know with at Scale Engine, we've done quite a bit of testing with doing things like testing the different TCP congestion control algorithms, which is your net.inet.tcp.cc. Trying different ones with different types of connections, right? Like when the servers were close by each other, the default one worked very well. But when we were sending data from like Germany to Toronto, we noticed that every time there was a little bit of packet loss or something, it thought that the connection was congested when maybe it wasn't. And so by switching to from a loss-based congestion control algorithm to a delay-based one, it was then based on, we'll know that there's a problem with the connection when packets start taking longer to get there because of buffer bloat, right? Or just because of the congestion. And so with that, we were able to get, double the performance over the network, over the internet of sending data between these two countries by tuning the different algorithms and stuff. So yeah, you can try a lot of different things and use iPerf to validate what those changes have changed. And I just want to, VNstat updated yet? Yes. So now if you look at the VNstat, hey, let me switch it back so you can see it. You can see that so far we've received 77 megabits and sent 3 gigabytes, and that we averaged only 13.8 kilobytes per second, and then the daily average has been 500 kilobits per second. So it will eventually help you keep track of how much bandwidth you're firing back and forth in the different directions. And it gives you daily, I think weekly and monthly summaries, and you can draw graphs, and it can be very useful if you have to keep track of your usage. For example, if you have a cap on how much you're allowed to use, or if you just need to have an idea of what's going on. There's a lot of other tools you can look at for seeing what's happening in real time. Like if we do, it's a good one. I like nload. If we look at that, we can see, here's my interface here, and you can see traffic stats in real time. Just fire up iPerf here. If I just start firing 500 megabits of UDP out of my machine, we can now see that the outgoing is showing that 500 megabits, and the average since we started, and total amount of data that's transferred. And then after iPerf is run for its 10 seconds, we see that the outgoing rate drops right away. And depending on the flags, you can also get little ASCII graphs. So we see we got almost no traffic, and I'll start shooting some traffic. See a giant wall. Then if I shoot less traffic, you'll see less. And so on. And it kind of gives you an idea of what's happening. And so yeah, that's the tutorial.
Oh, very cool. Thank you, Alan. We'll be right back in a minute with our weekly news roundup. Okay, first up in our weekly news roundup segment, we got a new pfSense talk in Tokyo at FreeBSD conference there. I guess Isaac Levy's going to be presenting pfSense practical experiences from home routers to high availability data center deployments, which is going to be a cool talk to attend if you're going to be in the Tokyo area. Yeah, the event's going to be held February 17th, and again, if you're in the area, try and get out to that. He's also going to be looking for some help to translate the pfSense documentation into Japanese. So if you can speak a couple languages, or maybe type them, can write them, this may be a cool way to help out the pfSense project.
Yep. And just another note there that Ike's day job is the senior Unix system administrator at the National Hockey League.
Oh, okay. Yes. That's cool. Excellent. Well, next up, we have MonoWall. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. MonoWall 1.81 was just released a couple days ago. Yep. So for those of you who don't know, MonoWall is an older BSD-based firewall OS that's mostly focused on embedded applications. I mean, I used it years and years and years ago to set up a home router. Yep. pfSense, if you're familiar with pfSense, they were forked from it in 2004, and it has a lot more active development going on now, obviously.
I would say that the big difference is pfSense is meant to run on an old PC, whereas MonoWall is meant to run on a tiny embedded device. Like,
sure.
The latest version, they had to bump up the memory requirement. You need to have at least 128 megabytes of memory now.
Oh no! Yeah. There goes on my systems, right?
Your CF card or disk or whatever you're storing the OS on, that's going to require a whopping 32 megabytes of space.
Dang! Wow. Well, that is cool. And they still managed to cram FreeBSD 8.4 into this new version.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. So anyway, if you go check out the source link, there's a full list of their updates in the changelog there. And it's an interesting project to check out. I still have fond memories of setting up my first MonoWall installation many, many years ago, and it worked and just ran like a champ. I don't think I ever touched it again once the initial setup was done. So it was a good deal. Next up, we have some news about Ansible and PF plus NTP. So what Michael Lucas give us this week, Alan?
One of the top story that he was talking about was that NTPD, which is something that almost everybody runs on their server, was turned into the latest distributed denial of service amplifier. Basically, there were certain packets you could send to it from a spoof UDP packets, and it would send back a large reply, allowing anybody to turn every server on the internet into basically a bot in a botnet to attack someone.
DDoS, yeah.
There were a couple of my servers which have giant gigabit per second upload speeds that got hit with this, and I quickly resolved the issue by swapping out the ntp.conf with the newer one from FreeBSD 11. And then a little bit later, the security advisor came out suggesting basically the same thing.
Same thing, yep.
Yeah, and also in FreeBSD 11, they have a newer version of NTP, I think, as well, that solves the problem. But there's a security advisory that explains how to either mitigate it with config changes on your NTP or to upgrade to a newer NTP from the ports tree, which has the newer config file.
Okay.
So Michael was talking about how he runs it on a lot of his servers, and most of them use the standard NTP client. He said, I needed to verify that none of my servers were being used in a DDoS amplification. So to do this, he needed to give all the clients a standard NTP configuration pointing at his personal NTP server, and he goes on to explain how he did that.
That's cool.
And then also how to automate using PF and NTP using Ansible, which is one of the orchestration frameworks, kind of like I use Puppet for the same thing. And apparently Ansible is nicer.
Oh, okay. I guess there's a note here that OpenNTPD is not affected as well.
It doesn't have the flaw that allowed this to happen. But the flaw has since been fixed and is easily mitigated with a configuration that doesn't accept the one type of management command that nobody ever used in the past from anything other than localhost, and then the problem went
away. There you go.
Yep.
Well, cool. Well, next up, just a quick follow-up from a few weeks ago, there was a RUBSD conference that took place, and I guess
Moscow.
The videos are now online.
Yes, and they have they have videos of the talks like you'd normally expect, but they also did some interviews, which were quite interesting.
Yep, looks like Theo and Henning did some talks, nice high quality ones. So definitely check out the link.
Like super HD.
Yeah,
I don't know if you can see that. That's
I wanted to see.
That's a degree of detail of Theo's face that I don't even think I got that close to his face when I was in person with him.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah,
well, definitely check out the links.
Very good interviews.
Do you know what the topics were?
The interviews covered pretty much everything, but the talks, Theo's was about exploit mitigation techniques, and Henning's was about the design, implementation, and future of PF. And then there was also a third talk by Mike Belafrov. I don't know how to pronounce that, where he talked about where is crypto headed in the future.
Oh, that's interesting. Curious. I have to go watch that now.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, lastly, for the weekly news roundup, of course, our PCBSD segment. This is pretty much becoming a regular feature at the end of the roundup. Yep. So just a quick recap. Last week, we released 10.0 RC4. All the Wine stuff is now available. So if you're a user running Wine, I know I got some friends who run Steam through it, and that's available now on RC4. There's going to be an upgrade for 9.2 systems. They'll be allowed to upgrade to version 10. It'll keep all the PBIs, upgrade them for you. One of the things people are asking, though, is when's our release coming? So RC5 is literally trying to go out the door right now. Matter of fact, me and Alan have been working on this all day, trying to get it out to the nodes. Yep. But once that's up, RC5 will be announced, and then our release will be about a week after. So hopefully this time next week, we'll be talking about 10.0 release going out.
Nice.
But yep, RC5 has some important fixes in it. Just as a heads up, if you're doing a Optimus video on, say, an NVIDIA laptop, or if you have an ATI hybrid laptop, there's some new cool stuff for making sure we detect the right video card and can bring X up happily on your Intel integrated, as opposed to trying to hit the ATI card, which doesn't run in discrete mode. But that was interesting. So those fixes are in RC5 now, and just
I'm looking forward to
other fixes as well.
Looking forward to trying that out on my laptop, because I have the Optimus where I can set it to whichever way I want. But I want to see if I can maybe use the Intel, since I don't do a lot of graphics heavy stuff on my laptop anyway.
Yeah, that's
save a lot of battery.
Yeah, I've been running in discrete mode with the NVIDIA for quite a while, just because it worked really well. But the Intel stuff now works just as good, I think. I mean, I can even, I've done presentations on it and stuff, and can extend my desktop and all that. So, yeah, I'm going to be switching over just for the extra battery life when I'm out on the road.
Yeah, like I have the giant 9-cell battery, and I get good battery life even with the NVIDIA on all the time. But, you know, if I can... go from 6 hours to 8 hours, then why wouldn't I, right?
Yeah, why wouldn't you? Especially if you're not gaming, which I'm not. It's just open. I'm doing email and development. So, yeah, so all that stuff's going to be in the RC5 release, which hopefully we'll be announcing. I don't know if it'll finish today, but probably early in the morning tomorrow. I'll be sending those emails out. So coming down the pike. So that's the end of the weekly news roundup this week. Next up, we'll be back with your feedback and questions. So now we're going to go to your questions and feedback from this last week. So first up, we got a question from Shaul. He's wondering, listening to how we talk about a lot of stuff on the show, do we use FreeBSD exclusively? When we talk about different ways to do things, he hears a FreeBSD bias without considering if their answers are universal in BSD or if it's specific. Well, you know, for myself, I'll let you give your answer to that, Alan, but I pretty much use FreeBSD exclusively here. I mean, I work on PCBSD all day, which is FreeBSD based, so I don't have any of the other BSDs actually spun up at the moment. But that's where I'm coming from. I've used others in the past, but just I'm not currently at the moment.
Yeah.
So how about you, Alan?
In my day job, I use FreeBSD exclusively. You know, all of our servers are FreeBSD. We had 2 CentOS servers for one specific application, and those have since been migrated to run inside Beehive. So everything is FreeBSD now. When I used to teach a couple of years ago, we did some of the stuff on NetBSD, just because that's the person who wrote the course before me, who's actually my business partner now, was more familiar with NetBSD, and so they used that. And so I knew a little bit about that, but I hadn't done much with OpenBSD at all. And honestly, the lack of experience with NetBSD and OpenBSD hurt my score on the BSD certification exam a little bit, although, you know, I still did very well. But yeah, in general, on this show, I've used more OpenBSD than I ever have in the past. And that's probably shown a couple of times. If you were watching the live show today and saw the aborted attempt at the tutorial, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah, so yes, there probably is a bias towards FreeBSD a little bit, and it's not on purpose. It's just that's what we know, and you know, we know it like inside out too. So
yeah, it's one of those things when you're working on it all day, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, like that's what your mind's going to go to immediately when you're answering a question or, you know, going to topics and whatnot. And it's not that we don't like the other BSDs. It's just we're not heavy users of them. So we're, you know, I'm at least trying to make an effort to be as impartial as we can. And I think if you looked at our guest list and the tutorials we've done, we've been pretty impartial, you know, as far as bringing in other.
When we answer a question, we can only answer based on our experience.
Our immediate knowledge is this, and that's going to be FreeBSD in this case.
It's always what's fresh in my mind. I see some of the stuff going on in OpenBSD, and I'm like, I want that right now. The Relay stuff is just so tasty.
For my part, I want all their ACPI stack, and having better suspend and resume on laptops would be fantastic.
Yeah, for sure.
Those are the things I gravitate to. So. Yep. Cool. Yeah, so he says basically as a closing to his comment that he's biased towards OpenBSD, always be his first choice. He knows FreeBSD as well, but he cannot answer questions about jails or ZFS. So again, we'll try and make an effort to be as agnostic as possible. But when somebody, if we're doing a tutorial on jails, obviously it's going to be a FreeBSD thing or ZFS, which is what a lot of the rage is about. I mean, Alan, I don't know if you've noticed and you go to the conferences how many ZFS related talks there are, and that's just something that gets a lot of people excited. A lot of them come to conferences just to hear about
me
ZFS.
Excited, it was definitely the biggest birds of a feather group at VBSDCon, and that was a great one.
And that's one me and Alan both went to. So obviously we're going to want to talk about that because that's stuff we're using both in our day jobs.
Yeah,
so.
And in the email he points out, if someone's question was about how to best optimize the file system, although I don't know exactly how you optimize a file system, but he said talking about UFS versus Hammer versus ZFS and stuff is like, well, I can talk a little bit about UFS too and trim support and stuff. Although as far as I know, OpenBSD doesn't have trim support at all. Does it? I don't actually know. I'll have to ask an OpenBSD person because I don't know. And, as far as ZFS, I know lots about ZFS, and it's kind of specific to FreeBSD. And so
I know less about Hammer, though.
I've never even used Hammer, so I can really tell you how to set it up to get, a lot of it. Apparently, Hammer can do a lot of things that ZFS can do, but I wouldn't know how to do them on Hammer.
Yep. So I guess one thing I would suggest, if you perceive a bias or you want to help swing us towards your BSD of choice or be able to better answer questions, a couple things. You can watch the show live, and we have a chat room that we're usually monitoring during the show. And people write stuff and will correct us, and we'll do our best to answer the questions.
Right. Like when we were talking about OpenSSH earlier in the show, and I was like, I wasn't sure, but I was pretty sure that the way the private keys for SSH were encrypted on your machine was based on MD5. And I said that. I was like, and then so they're changing it to bcrypt. And Colin, who happens to know the answer, was in the chat room and pointed out that yes, it was MD5, not even MD5 crypt, because of how old it was, and that now switching to bcrypt as the key derivation function means that it's about 500 million times more secure, or more resistant to brute forcing.
Yeah, harder to crack or guess or whatever.
Yeah, and so yes, the chat room's great. If there's something specific you want to know about, and you can tell us, we can try to get the person who knows the most about that to be our interview, and so on. And if you think we got something wrong, Hammer, then let us know. Yeah, and if you have any influence over the people that have the answers to get them to come on the show and give the right information, then we'd love to have them.
Sure. Yeah, so we're open to anything, of course, and hey, we're reading your question right now on the air. So obviously we're willing to do this kind of stuff. So again, we'll make all of our best effort to try and be as exclusive or not exclusive, inclusive to all the BSDs, and put as much good info out there about all as we can.
I can't be an expert on all of them.
Yeah,
it's hard enough to keep up with the, as you've probably seen from the news on this show over the last 21 weeks, it's hard enough to keep up with what's going on in one of them, let alone all of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully we answered the question well for him. But next up,
Kel Alexander asks, he says he's running an OpenBSD router at home, replacing the stock router from his ISP, and he's added a wireless LAN card, so that he can have both wired and wireless at the same time. However, he doesn't get the performance that he'd like out of the wireless network. Well, that's the nature of wireless usually, but it doesn't seem to be connected to the bandwidth or performance directly, as all the devices experience a loss of communications. So apparently, like, the wireless is going completely out rather than just being slow. So, if you wanted to test the performance, our tutorial on using iPerf today is probably the most helpful. Allow you to test, between this device and this device, what's the speed like versus this device, or here's my laptop and there's the router. Do an iPerf, see how it goes, or set it to run continuously, and then move around and see how signal strength maybe affects the speed and things like that. So yeah, iPerf is great. In case you didn't know, there's also an iPerf port for Windows, so it also allows you to test that way. If your network doesn't consist only of BSD machines, then that might be important. As far as the thing going out completely, it's hard to say. I would imagine if there was something like that, you get some kind of diagnostic messages in the operating system. Like I know with a hardware network card, like a hardwired network card, you get interface up, interface down messages if, for example, the switch goes out or you unplug the cable or something. He says he's thinking it might be the card and that it isn't really cut out for being an access point. That can depend on the card, I guess, and other stuff. Without knowing what card you're using. And I don't know anything about wireless because I just wired my whole house for 10 gigabit Ethernet because wires are better.
Wires are always better. It's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. And so before I moved into this house, I just had wires put everywhere so that I wouldn't have the problem of, I can't run a wire from there to there. It's like, nope, already done.
And my poor house is only gigabit. I feel so sad.
Well, mine's only running at gigabit. I just future-proofed it because I don't want to tear up the walls a second time.
I gotcha. Cool. Okay, next up.
He says, he just asked if there's any tips or tricks you might try. Definitely looking at iPerf and seeing, trying to figure out if there's anything else that happens or changes when that goes out. Ask on the mailing list.
Somebody in IRC just suggested look at the power management too.
Yep, make sure the card's just not going to sleep, I suppose. And then the other thing is, if you can get a USB wireless card or something, a second wireless card to try and see if you see the same behavior or different or what. But yeah. So next question.
Okay. Next question is from Mike. So basically, stuff, iSCSI, and then at the end, I hope you guys make T-shirts, right, Alan? Yeah. So are we doing T-shirts? No, I'll get back and answer his question in a second. But TJ, I don't know if that's on the radar.
Yes,
but
we want to do a T-shirt. We just haven't decided what to put on it. So if you have an idea what you would like on your BSD Now T-shirt,
cool.
Yeah.
Send it. I mean, maybe we need to do a contest for that, actually. Getting a T-shirt design or something.
You don't even have to draw it. We just need an idea of what to put on it.
Yeah. I'd really like to go to the conferences and do interviews in the T-shirts. That. Just look cool.
The TechSnap T-shirt is horrible. It's just a giant picture of my face, and there's people walking around with my face on the shirt, and it's like, what? We want to do something much more clever for BSD Now.
There you go. Okay, getting back to this.
That's the other thing we'd like to know. Would people prefer a T-shirt, or would they like something more like a polo shirt, like a button-up shirt or something?
Maybe we need a poll on the website. That might be helpful. I don't know. We have the capability to do that, Alan?
Sure. We can come up with something.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And then maybe if we have some designs or suggestions for what to put on the shirt, we can see what would be popular and take a poll and then not listen to anybody and do them all.
Yep. Well, Colin says he wants a T-shirt, so.
Oh, okay, cool. There you go.
So there, it's decided we're doing T-shirt.
Yeah, and then we can take him to BSD events and raffle them off at the end or do other things. That might be kind of cool. I'm getting excited. Okay. Sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to hijack your question there. You're the one who said something about hope you guys make T-shirts, and that got me all excited. So anyway, back to your real question, though. You're looking into the reliability of new kernel space iSCSI target software in FreeBSD 10. Since the feature is now included in release, he's wondering if it's considered production ready. As an aside, he started some of his own testing and seems to perform fine in virtual environments. But when a Windows Initiator client connects, it logs messages about some of the configuration bits being invalid. But despite this, he's found no issues in functionality. So
in general,
like they focused. Reliable.
Yeah, they focused on reliability and testing in the beginning, and so the performance isn't as high as it could be yet, and they're still working on that. But as far as I know, yes, it's ready to go.
Yeah, I would consider it production ready at this point. So sounds like your own testing shows that it's working pretty well too. So hopefully that answers your question. It's one of those things, 10.1 will probably improve it, and then 11 and so forth and so on.
The .0 release isn't always the greatest, although, we saw an excellent talk by Scott Long at VBSDCon about making .0 not scary. And, as we kind of discussed earlier, 10 went through a lot of testing. Like we had all the alphas and then all the betas and then all the release candidates. And, we fixed pretty much everything that anybody found wrong with it. So
cool.
In general, I would say that, it's ready to go. Okay.
Well, you got the next question here, Alan, from Charlie.
Yes. So Charlie asks about FreeBSD versus Red Hat Enterprise Linux. He's saying that we need to have some kind of showdown or something about between the difference. And in particular, he's kind of looking at why he should choose FreeBSD over Red Hat Enterprise Linux for his next deployment or whatever. And there's a couple of different things. As far as things like OpenSSH, in general, OpenSSH is OpenSSH. They're the same on both. Depending on when the releases come out, you might be stuck on a slightly different version, but the security updates still go through, so it's there. And I don't know about with Red Hat, but with FreeBSD, you can always install a newer version from ports. On my 9.2 systems, I'm actually using OpenSSH 6.4 from ports tree to get access to some of the faster crypto options.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not sure if we'd necessarily need to do a full showdown, though. I mean, maybe more of a just, a BSD for Linux guys or something, like a BSD noob guide. Here's some of the main differences in your syntax and your commands. Here's the SD system.
10 makes it so much easier because having PKG out of the box means that, people that are used to yum or apt-get can have an analogous command, right? Package install whatever you're looking for, and it works. I think that was the biggest thing that it was always felt like,
how do you manage
how do you explain to Linux people coming over that we don't have something the same as that?
Well, now that we do, I think it'd be easier to show that. So, maybe we should just do like a beginner's introduction / tutorial at some point.
So if you are someone fairly experienced with Linux or new to BSD or something, and you have specific questions that should be covered in a segment like that, we'd love to hear them so we can put them together into a cohesive tutorial or rundown or something.
Yeah, I know some people get tripped up on the device names, that being different. So it might be good to cover a little bit of why that is and how it's different and such. Well, cool.
Yep.
Okay. So next up, we have a long question from Kevin.
Yeah.
Kernel patch question. So first of all, he says, thanks for the great show. He can't believe that we say the place to be SD every week with anything approaching a straight face. I practice in the mirror every day.
Is that how you do it? There's a reason why I make you do it.
Yeah, that's right. But he was going to ask a question on one of the boards, but since we have a little time for there, he was going to give it a shot. Let's see. There's been recently a spat of security patches for FreeBSD. He's running a 9.2 release desktop workstation with a custom kernel, among other things. He wants access to hardware crypto, which is not available in generic.
So a point on that one is that it's not compiled into generic, but it's a loadable module. So you don't necessarily need to do a custom kernel to get that.
Load it.
Yeah. You can, if in your /boot/loader.conf, if you just put AESNI_load equals yes, then it'll load the module and it'll be just as if it was compiled into the kernel, allowing you to avoid getting off of a generic kernel. Because once you're not using a generic kernel, FreeBSD update isn't very happy with you anymore.
Yeah, it is.
And I love FreeBSD update. I hope Colin's still listening. I didn't mention it, but I had this one server that I installed like FreeBSD 6.1 on. And I've since upgraded it through every version of FreeBSD all the way up to 9.2 currently with only SSH access to it. It's in a different country. If an update screws it up, it's a huge pain to get help fixing it. And I've never had a problem. Just FreeBSD update worked perfectly every version. So I haven't reinstalled at all. The system still
keeps on chugging
from when I installed it in 6.1. And I've just FreeBSD update and port master all the way up to 9.2.
Cool. Well, if you're going to load a whole bunch of kernel modules, the way we do it on PCBSD is we use it in rc.conf. We just use the KLD_list variable, which will load them after the kernel boots and loads, which we found to be a lot faster.
Yes, because when you're loading them during the loader,
it's slow.
It's a lot slower. Now, it can depend if you, for example, if you're using encrypted disks,
some things you want to load
ahead of time. Geli at the boot time, and if you want Deli to be fast, you need to load AES-NI then. But for a lot of stuff, loading it after will be a lot faster because you'll have access to the file system cache and everything instead of doing the old-fashioned slow access.
Like Wi-Fi drivers or wireless firmwares and
all that kind of fun stuff.
SMBFS. I mean, basically, there's a list of like 30 things that get loaded after, and they're much, much quicker. Okay, so let's see here. So his procedure he has used to apply the patches looks like this. He has installed and booted the generic kernel temporarily so FreeBSD update won't complain. Tricky. He runs FreeBSD update fetch. This tells me there's a list of updates. He applies the updates with FreeBSD update install, which I understand should also patch my source tree, if your source tree is there. Then he reboots the system and runs FreeBSD update fetch again, which tells me now there's no updates needed. Then he drops into single user mode. He rebuilds the world and kernel to ensure that there are no surprises. Then he builds a generic kernel, and he reboots into his freshly built world and kernel, sees that everything's working fine, drops into single user mode, builds and installs his custom kernel. That's a lot of building and moving stuff around. Okay. Yep. Here's where things get weird. He boots into his custom kernel now. Everything appears to be working. But if he runs FreeBSD update fetch, it shows me the same list of patches I just applied as if they were newly needed.
Yeah.
All of them, not just the kernel patches. Well, if you rebuilt world, that makes sense. All the checksums are different now.
Yeah. So the way FreeBSD update works is it's looking at the SHA-256 hash of the file and noticing that yours doesn't match the updated one. That's because you compiled it. So
we don't have fully deterministic builds. Like every two compiles have different timestamps and all kinds of stuff that makes the checksum
Colin's
change.
FreeBSD update does all kinds of craziness with changing the clock and stuff, and stripping things down and a couple other things to try to make sure that we're finding only the differences that are actually changes in the file, not the differences that are just differences between you compiled this at 10 a.m. versus 11 a.m. And so, if you're doing the fresh build of world anyway, then you can just skip the FreeBSD update step entirely.
If you know you've got the patches, just go ahead.
If you only need the custom kernel, you can do just the custom kernel compile and not install world, and you already have the updated world from FreeBSD update.
Correct.
So then it'll only complain that your kernel, and because it's custom, it won't complain. You're just doing it twice. You're updating and then updating it again with a slightly different version, and that's why it's saying
and that's just confusing. My recommendation would be just look at your Etsy FreeBSDupdate.conf file and just change the components there. Just remove the kernel component so it only checks and updates world. And then from there on out, just use FreeBSD update for your world, and then just roll your own custom kernel. Do a build
just
kernel,
do the
install kernel.
Just skip the world part, and you'll be done. Or if you prefer the compiling it, you can compile the whole thing and you just not use FreeBSD update.
I mean, that's your call. I mean, you're already doing one compile, but it is a lot quicker just to do the kernel.
For sure.
If that's all you want.
That
would probably be the easiest way.
And depending what you're doing, you have to be doing something pretty strange nowadays to not be able to get away with a generic kernel with modules. And I haven't had a generic kernel in so long. It's like I'm very hesitant to do one because I just love FreeBSD update so much and letting it do everything for me.
Sure. So let's see here. I think we pretty much answered what he was running into here. He was wondering why FreeBSD update really didn't patch his tree, but when he checked, it did patch the tree. But why is it still telling me?
So basically what it's doing is that when you're compiling it, you have a different timestamp on the file, so it's not the same file as what FreeBSD update expects.
And it's just going to keep bugging you. Hey, this file doesn't match. We don't know where it came from. Maybe you need to update it because it doesn't know if it has that specific security bit in it that got fixed.
Right. So the FreeBSD update server does a lot of work to strip out those tiny differences so that you get the smallest change possible. But if you can't really mix FreeBSD update and compiling world. It's one or the other.
Okay. Well, hopefully we answered your question there then. Okay, well, next up, we do want to mention we still have our contest going on. So we have a very handsome, handmade FreeBSD pillow. Yes, you heard right, a FreeBSD pillow. All you have to do to win said pillow is write a tutorial for the show. And if you'd like to do that, you can submit your BSD tutorial write-ups to feedback@bsdnow.tv. feedback@bsdnow.tv. So, of course, if you want to check out details, see a picture of the pillow, rules, instructions, all that jazz, go to bsdnow.tv/contest, and you can see a really cool picture, what it looks like, and just get all the details. Let's see, what's the deadline on that, Alan?
It's going to be the end of January, although we might have to extend it a little bit. We haven't gotten any tutorials yet. I got a couple of people say that I'm almost done, but we're hoping.
Well, finish them up. You have good odds.
Yes. Colin, do that S-pipe one and get it in there and get your free pillow.
Yes, definitely. So, go ahead and check out that link again, and we'll have that up on the website, of course, and hopefully you'll have a good chance of winning it now. So, as usual, all of our tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv. So, if you're listening to the podcast in your car or something and you wanted to go see what we did, you can always go hit the website when you get back to your computer.
Whatever, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, the Poudre tutorial got a couple of fixes and modernizations. Yeah, so if that's something.
Package NG moved from 1.1 to 1.2. And
so you got all the new config in that. Okay. Cool. So take a look at that if you're rolling your own packages. And as usual, you can send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or maybe stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's really the only place we are monitoring. Yes. So please send your comments there. Don't just submit it on YouTube as a comment and then wonder why we don't reply. Yeah. We're not being rude. We just don't see it. So.
Exactly. It's like we have a lot to keep up with as it is. We can't go hunting down everybody's comments. If you want us to hear it, send it to us. And we'd really like to hear from you.
Yeah, same thing with the Jupiter broadcasting page. I mean, we just don't have time to go and check every page where the show's been embedded or elsewhere and then read comments there and respond to them on that place. Yeah. I mean, just send it in if you want to get an answer or if you have a question you want on the show. That's the place to do it too.
That's why there's no comment system on bsdnow.tv, because you need to email us so we actually see it.
Yep. That's right. And we usually do reply to those. I mean, TJ replies to those pretty darn quick.
I think every single one has got a reply of at least, we'll look at that, or it'll be on this episode if you want to catch your thing being read live.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. So as usual, we do broadcast live, so you can see all the behind the scenes stuff, all the bloopers, all that stuff every week, 2 p.m. Eastern, Wednesday, 1900 UTC. So check it out if you're by a PC or a place where you can watch that. It's kind of cool to see how we make the show. So if you want to get a little behind the scenes, and we sometimes interact with you in the chat room, or we can bounce stuff back and forth if people have questions. So again, check it out live Wednesdays, 2 p.m. Eastern. So thank you very much for being with us today on the show. We hope you enjoyed it. I know we had fun making it, and we'll be here same time next week.
And thanks again to Colin for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Colin. Really appreciate it. Great interview today, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as well.
Yeah. Hurry up and get your tutorials in. See you next week.
See you next week, guys.